After being hit by a meteorite, Susan transforms into a super-powered giant and is recruited into the team of monsters responsible for defending the Earth from an alien invasion. Today we'll be recapping the story of the 2009 movie, Monsters vs. Aliens. Somewhere in the galaxy, a rocky planet collapses and explodes into millions of pieces, releasing a large chunk of quantonium-energized rock that travels through space towards Earth. In California, a woman named Susan finishes the preparations for her wedding ceremony and goes to the church where she talks to all the guests. Before the wedding, the woman goes outside where she meets her fiancé Derek, who tells her they'll have to cancel their honeymoon in Paris to move to Fresno County, where he'll be working as the new anchor for Channel 23. Even though she's sad about not going to France, Susan supports her fiancé and congratulates him on his promotion, asking him to go down the aisle and wait while she finishes getting ready. But as soon as Derek enters the church, the woman hears a mysterious bang coming from the sky and notices a gigantic meteorite coming towards her. Susan is hit and luckily barely suffers any scratches, allowing her to proceed with the ceremony as normal. However, while she is taking her vows, Derek notices that the bride's skin is fluorescent and quite greenish. At that moment, her hair begins to turn white and her body grows until she no longer fits inside the church, drawing the attention of the American army, who arrive in a matter of seconds. Attempting to immobilize her, the soldiers grab Susan's arm and fire a giant tranquilizer dart that hits her in the leg, but she doesn't let up and takes revenge by throwing the syringe at one of the soldiers' feet. From that moment on, she starts feeling sleepy until she passes out in the open, waking up inside a futuristic prison a few hours later. Confused, the woman gets out of bed and walks to a large room with a table in the center, but while exploring the place, she hears voices behind one of the doors and approaches to try to talk, being completely ignored. Just then, a strange tube comes out of the ceiling and leaves an extremely disgusting slime on the table, which attracts Dr. Cockroach, a scientist who was experimenting with insects and ended up turning into a humanoid mutant. Startled by his appearance, Susan picks up a spoon and begins to strike him until she smashes the deformed cockroach against the table. Surprised by the existence of such a thing, the woman starts walking backwards and ends up stumbling upon Bob, a brainless, one-eyed gelatin that was created through a genetically modified tomato. While she's talking to the two, Missing Link appears in her hair and introduces himself as a rather womanizing half-man half-fish monster who has spent the last 20,000 years frozen. After introducing themselves, the trio asks Susan's monster name and realize she doesn't have one, but before they can give her a nickname, lunchtime arrives and they each get a different meal, except for Susan, who starts walking backwards still until she hits her back on the Insectosaurus, a small larva that was hit by a nuclear bomb and is now over 120 meters tall. While Missing Link soothes Bug with a caress on her belly, Susan runs to the corner and starts banging on the wall for help, until suddenly, General Warren comes out of one of the doors and orders the monsters back to their cells. Happy to finally see a human, Susan asks to get out of there and the general begins to present the facilities, saying that this is the place that the American government founded in the 50s to hide the monsters, and now that she has become giant, she is condemned to stay in this place for the rest of her life, without any contact with the outside world. After touring the place, General Warren takes the woman back to her cell and tells her they've redecorated the place with a kitten poster to calm her down, and changed her name to Jinormika. Meanwhile, in space, an alien named Gallaxhar awakens from his slumber and discovers that the meteorite containing the quantonium has crashed to Earth. Wanting every atom of the substance, the alien version of the squid sends a robot probe to extract the quantonium and orders it to destroy anyone who tries to interfere with its goal. On Earth, a couple spots a giant meteorite falling in the middle of the woods and alerts the authorities, causing the president to summon the entire American army and go personally to establish contact with the alien, but the probe completely ignores it and tries to crush it, initiating an army reaction. Even with all the American artillery, the probe does not suffer any scratches because it has a force field protecting its bodywork, which forces the army to retreat. After the evacuation, the American High Summit meets and the advisors begin to debate the best way to deal with ET, but as no one gives an efficient solution, General Warren invades the meeting and suggests using the monsters to fight for them. To convince them that it's a good idea, the general introduces each of the monsters and explains how they got their powers, saying that this is the ideal team to fight the aliens. Unsuspecting of what is happening outside, Bob and Missing Link play cards while Dr. Cockroach conducts some experiments on Susan, trying to get her back to normal. After the failed test, a general arrives on the scene and reveals that they will be going on a special mission, and that they will win their long-awaited freedom if they can defeat the alien robot. In San Francisco, the military manages to locate the alien probe and drops the monsters near it, leaving everyone frightened by the colossal size of the enemy. Panicked, Susan begins to hyperventilate and Dr. Cockroach suggests she hide in the city while they try to deal with the enemy robot, but because of the size difference, they can only watch as the probe crushes Bob and begins walking towards the center. In the city, Susan is located by the robot that, instead of attacking her, begins to scan her body, identifying the quantum inside her and finally entering hunting mode. Now that it knows who to attack, the probe begins to chase Ginormica, who leaps over buildings like she's Spider-Woman, but realizing she won't get very far that way, she decides to use two convertibles, using them to gain speed while going down a hill. At the same time, Missing Link swims through the sewers and Dr. Cockroach rides a jet streetcar, but as he tries to tell them his plan, Bob breaks free from the rig's feet and flies straight towards them, blinding his colleagues, who end up falling into San Francisco Bay. A few meters away, Susan skates out of control and ends up on the Golden Gate Bridge, causing an accident with a truck that brings traffic to a standstill. As she tries to clear the track, the probe approaches from the sea to capture it and ends up getting its claws caught in the bridge cables, causing the asphalt to twist and dozens of cars to fall into the crusher inside its mouth. At that moment, the military finally arrives with the bug that hijacks the bridge and splashes several layers of silk into the enemy's eyes, blocking his vision. Almost at the same time, Missing Link and the others arrive on the bridge and end up distracting Susan, who is caught in the alien robot's clutches, but thanks to her new powers, she manages to resist and open the android's hand through sheer brute force. While wrangling with Ginormica, the rig ends up destroying part of the asphalt that begins to crack, causing the cars to slide towards the water, but Susan manages to keep everyone safe by using her leg as a barrier and holding the vehicles. Taking advantage of the robot being busy, Dr. Cockroach climbs through Ginormica's body and into the alien's mouth, arriving at its central system where several wires coordinate its functions. To help his friend, the radioactive cockroach takes two cables and joins the copper parts, but ends up causing a short that turns on the scanner in the robot's eyes, emitting a large amount of light that leaves the Insectosaurus totally paralyzed. As he no longer responds, Susan decides to prioritize the lives of civilians and asks Bob to remove the retaining walls, freeing cars to turn around and go over the bridge. With the people safe, Ginormica makes one last effort and begins to pull on the steel cable in the probe's hands, causing it to unbalance and fall over the bridge. Because of the colossal weight, the entire structure of the Golden Gate begins to sag and one of the main beams breaks in half, falling on the robot that has its body split in half, shutting it down almost instantly. On the other side of the universe, Gallaxhar sees that his plan has failed and decides to come personally to Earth, plotting a direct route to our galaxy to recover the quantum. After the battle, the monsters are taken to Ginormica's house, who decides to introduce the new friends to her family, but as they have not socialized with any human for decades, they are not at all pleasant and Bob almost devours Susan's mother. After things settle down, she finally realizes that Derek didn't come to the celebration and decides to go after him, leaving her friends with the rest of the family. But that was a bad decision, for Dr. Cockroach almost blows up the humans, who flee in despair. From the station, Derek is doing his last broadcast on channel 172 when Susan appears and picks him up in her lap, rocking him back and forth like a rag doll. After letting him go, the man says he's not ready for such a thing and can't put his career aside to help her get back to her normal size, ending the engagement at a time when she needs support the most. Very sad, Susan begins to wander along the road until she reaches a gas station where she sits thinking about life. Before long, the rest of the group comes up to her and they start talking about what it's like to be a monster, as well as talking about her relationship with Derek. During the conversation, Susan realizes that she has been deluded all along when she suddenly begins to be abducted by Gallaxhar, causing Insecto to fire his silk to try to hold her back, but the alien is unwilling to allow anyone to interfere and fires an energy sphere that hits the monster full on, causing the Godzilla bug to black out. Inside the ship, Susan is imprisoned by Gallaxhar, who begins to explain about the quantonium while taking her to the extraction chamber, but halfway through, she manages to break through the force field and starts running after the alien, destroying much of the spaceship during the chase. In the main hall, Jinormika manages to knock E.T. down and starts running after him, but it was all a trap and she ends up being captured by the extraction chamber, starting the procedure to remove the quantum from her body. Slowly, Susan begins to lose her strength and shrink back to her normal size, becoming totally defenseless against Gallaxhar. Now that he has what he wants, the alien octopus intends to rebuild his civilization on Earth and begins the cloning process, creating an army of ETs charged with quantonium energy. With his thousands of copies, Gallaxhar starts a global broadcast to tell people about the invasion and say that all who oppose it will perish, which ends up spreading chaos across the planet. As a last resort, Warren reunites with the rest of the monsters and hands them each a jetpack, allowing the trio to fly towards Susan while he and his pilot stay behind to distract the alien cannons. As soon as it notices the general, the spaceship's AI fires an energy sphere that makes the motion of a boomerang and hits the back of the jet, causing a system crash and knocking Warren on top of the Insectosaurus, which is inside a cocoon. Inside, Bob uses his gelatinous properties to infiltrate the spaceship and find Susan, who is being taken to the incinerator. To save her, he has the idea of putting on the alien uniform and impersonating Gallaxhar to order the clone to deliver the prisoner, but the copy thinks Ello is a defective version and orders Bob and Dr. Cockroach to take them both to the incinerator, handing over the badge and his gun to the monsters. Seizing the opportunity, the Jello shoots the clone and they start walking towards the exit, but Dr. Cockroach knows that the invasion will continue anyway and decides to activate the ship's self-destruct. Completely clueless, Bob stops one of the clones to ask how to get to the central core and discovers that it is just above the extraction chamber, realizing that the defective slime has one screw loose. Dr. Cockroach decides it's a danger to leave it armed and starts pulling the object out of his hands, causing an accidental shot that hits one of the clones in front of everyone. Even with the intellect of an amoeba, the other copies finally notice that there is something strange and realize that they have invaded the ship, starting the great final battle between monsters and aliens. For some reason, none of the clones use weapons and both Ello and Bob manage to knock out several of them fairly easily. Even without powers, Susan decides to help and takes the gun from Dr. Cockroach's hands, firing at a platoon of aliens, but the kick of the gun sends her flying with everything towards the center of the ship. Right behind her, Dr. Cockroach advances through the walls while Bob goes Pac-Man and starts devouring all the aliens he finds along the way, but they end up trapped in the extraction chamber and the blue muck throws everyone into the central energy core. As soon as it notices the invaders, the aircraft's artificial intelligence encrypts the entire system with a color code, but this is extremely easy for Dr. Cockroach, who manages to disable the security system as if he were in a dance machine at the arcade. With the security code deciphered, Dr. Cockroach programs the ship to self-destruct in the next 6 minutes and cancels the invasion. But Gallaxhar still has a plan B and orders the artificial intelligence to concentrate the quantum near his escape pod. With 5 minutes left to self-destruct, Link steals the vehicle from one of the clones and begins to carry his friends out. But the weight of the 4 is too much for the device and they end up overturning, making only Susan able to pass through the main gate. With her friends trapped inside, the human gives up on escaping and steals a pair of floating skates to look for another way out, ending up at the robot probe station that begins to attack her. Still, Susan manages to dodge all the blows and manages to fly outside the spacecraft, where she comes into view of Gallaxhar's energy cannon. Even though she is almost hit, the woman manages to dodge and kicks one of the skates that breaks the windshield of the spaceship and hits the alien. Determined to save her friends, the human orders Gallaxhar to open the ship's gates and surrender, but he knows she's harmless without the quantonium and starts climbing towards his escape pod, forcing Susan to jump on E.T.'s back to stop him escaping with the substance. Even without her powers, the woman manages to knock him down and gets into a grapple with Gallaxhar, managing to get the better of him and take his futuristic pistol. Still, Gallaxhar says she can't open the gates now that the self-destruct has been programmed and there's nothing she can do, but Susan disagrees with his assertion and fires high into the air, hitting the quantonium which falls all over her. In this way, Susan transforms into Jinormika once again and manages to reach the main hall quite easily, saving her friends from being crushed by the rubble. Even so, they are still not safe and jump out of the ship, but while they are in free fall, Warren appears to rescue them riding on top of the bug, which has now turned into a moth over 120 meters high. With a few seconds left to self-destruct, the monsters fly away from there while Gallaxhar tries to activate the escape pod, but he is not fast enough and explodes along with his spaceship. With planet Earth safe, the monsters return to the city where they finally gain recognition from the humans. From the crowd, Derek appears with a cameraman and says he forgives Susan for screwing up, and claims he can forget what she did if she provides an exclusive interview for his new show. Obviously, Susan rejects the request and hits a nudge that sends the man tumbling into B.O.B, where he is trapped until finally regurgitated. Finally, General Warren congratulates the monsters on their victory and then goes on to the next mission, saying that a slug has fallen into a French nuclear reactor and that they will need to travel to Paris to stop the giant escargot. Eager to visit the city, everyone accepts the mission and rides on the winged version of Godzilla, which flies freely over the horizon until it reaches Europe. So what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, like and subscribe for more movie recaps.